rum was widely perceived as being oversweetened. It still is. And that was my experience as well. I would go and buy a bottle of a rum that I loved. But I would always be like, gosh, I just wish that it wasn't sweet. And rum is not sweet. There's nothing about rum off the still that is sweet. That is always added sweet. And so I was really focused on, like, does it have to be this way? Like, why? What's the deal here?
Welcome to the Koolers Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and I'm excited to have you join me as I interview community members and business leaders from the communities in which I live, work, and serve through my business Kooler Garage Doors. We're going to bring you highlights on characters in our communities. Why? Because community matters, and I want to know more about who is behind our business and leadership in order to understand and support the community fabric that our relationships make up. And collectively, we can build stronger communities that support our lifestyles, our youth, and our health. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Koolers Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and today we have Karen Hoskin joining us. She is the owner and founder of Montanya Distillers, and I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about Distillery, rum, and your story, Karen. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here with you.
Yeah, you're up in Crested Butte. One question I'd love to ask initially is, where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in the Bronx. My dad was at Fordham Law School when I was born, so they were living in a very tiny little apartment in the Bronx when I was born. And then quite soon after that, when I was almost 1.5 or 2 years old, they moved to Maine. So really, I grew up in Maine. My dad worked for the Bank of Maine, and we moved 11 times while I was growing up. So I can't really tell you a town. I can tell you that we cruised around a lot.
How did the Gunnison Valley and Crested Butte find you, or you it?
My husband is from Grand Junction. So we met in college in Massachusetts. And, we met at Williams College, which is a liberal arts college up in the Berkshire Mountains. And soon after graduation, I went out to Grand Junction and visited his family. And then I ended up in San Francisco, but I kept getting drawn back to Colorado. Eventually, he and I lived in Arizona for 10 years together and got married and did all that. But we were still always drawn back to Colorado. So it's been 25 years now that we've been in Colorado.
And what do you love about the area and being part of this community?
Oh my gosh, that is a very long list. Let's see. I mean, we spent a decade in Silverton, Colorado, which we loved. That's where we raised our kids, through about 6th and 8th grade, and in a beautiful school up there. But it was pretty clear to us that it was a little small. So when we moved here, it was kind of funny. People were like, "Oh, do you know how small a town this is? Do you know how long the off seasons are?" And we just were chuckling because, of course, Silverton, everything's like that on steroids. So we're serious about backcountry skiing, Nordic skiing. We ride mountain bikes and road bikes and trail run and, just basically everything. I can't really think of a lot of things that we wouldn't do if invited or if we decided we wanted to set out. We love to camp. So it's just a perfect place for everything we love to do. Plus, we found the business community here when we moved here in 2011. We found it much more approachable and professional than what we had been encountering in Silverton. So, that we've had our days since then, wondering if that was 100% the case, but we've generally found this to be, especially with Riverland and some of the infrastructure that this community has, we found it to be a better fit for the companies that we've had and run during the almost 12 years that we've been here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, as I understand it, you've been an entrepreneur for a while. You have Montanya Distillers, a new distillery down in Riverland. Tell me about that journey. How'd you get into distilling, and like specifically rum and
Mm.
rums?
Well, yeah, so back in 2008, I was a graphic designer and a brand builder and a web designer. And I'd had my own private practice for about 12 years at that point. And I was very focused on helping other companies to define themselves, to build out their brand identities, and to put themselves out into the public in a way that was cohesive and identifiable and good for their company. Excuse me, recovering. Good thing we're on Zoom. So that I'd been doing for more than 10 years. And I just literally woke up one morning and said, I'm kind of ready to do this for myself, my own brand, my own ideas, instead of handing everything off to other people. So that pretty much was from one day to the next. And I thought about what I loved and what I wanted to do. And I could see, so back in like 1992, I had thought about starting a brewery in Flagstaff, Arizona, where there are now like 3 craft breweries and they do really well. And I think the idea itself was pretty awesome. I think it was good. The problem was I'm celiac. I couldn't drink beer. I didn't drink beer. I don't drink beer. I never have. So it was a not a great fit. So but the trend that I saw in 1992 was really bore itself out in the marketplace. And so then in 2008, I saw the same trend coming into the world of craft distilling. And I thought, now there's a fit, because even though I don't drink a ton, when I do drink, I usually love to have a really good cocktail. And so in my life, I had become somewhat known among my peers for being that person that you invite to your dinner party, because she will come with the really good, in my case, really good rum, and ready to make cocktails for the whole group. And usually it was something that no one had ever heard of. If it was the holidays, I was making South American cocktails that nobody had ever heard of. So it was just kind of my thing. We all have our thing. And that I'd been doing for a very long time, probably 10, 12 years, at family gatherings and gatherings of friends. And I said in 2008, I was like, I want to make rum. Like, that's what I want to make. I love the spirit. It doesn't ever bother me the way many other spirits do. And we could have a long whole separate podcast about what people don't understand about the way alcohol is made and some of the additives and how it can affect people with, say, celiac disease or other types of illnesses. And so so I just wanted to make rum. And it was a little premature because the world didn't really yet understand rum. The world didn't understand how good rum could be, that it was as good, if not better, than many of the whiskeys and bourbons and scotches that were in the marketplace. And I was like, but that's what I want to do. That's what I love. That's what I can stay excited about. Now I'm almost at the 15-year mark, and I've managed to stay excited about rum all that time. And I can tell you everything that I imagined might happen has happened. So obviously most people know about the crazy boom of craft spirits around the country, around the world. People know about the crazy boom of craft cocktails. When I started this company in '08, there was not a craft cocktail boom. Rum was not well recognized. American rum was definitely not well recognized. So many different little hurdles that we had to clear for such a long time. But we're here today, 2022, with premium rum being one of the fastest growing categories in alcohol beverage world. Premium rum in general just overtook whiskey in the UK and the EU for the first time in history in 2021. So that was a big deal. And then for me personally, I've managed to really be part of the movement of helping people to understand the industry, the business, craft rum, American rum. I've helped to establish American rum with some credibility in the world, and then also employ people in a seasonal ski town on a more of a year-round basis with higher than average wages and an exportable good, which those are very unusual and rare things in a town like Crested Butte.
Yes, this is amazing. I love the story. So, have you always been that visionary? Have you always seen or sensed trends? I mean, you mentioned the brewery, the microbrewery, kind of catching the wave of micro distillery, specialty cocktails. Has that been a part of your life for long term?
It's a good question. I worked for a Fortune 500 company for a period of my career, and I was really in their trend division. So they would send us trend shopping. It was fascinating, cool thing to be able to do. Send you with the company credit card out to LA or something, and you just spend 4 or 5 days cruising around to find out what was happening, what people were doing, what was cutting edge. But it's a good question. It's like, was I trend visionary or was I just trend recognizing? I think ultimately I'm better at recognizing trends that are already underway than I am imagining what the next trend might be. So yeah, I've really enjoyed often sort of saying, yeah, that's gonna fly, that's gonna go. Watch what happens over the next 5 years. That's gonna take off. But I also am, I would say that I'm not someone who can necessarily come up with what the new thing is going to be. I'm a follower. Yeah.
Yeah, an observer, catching the wave. Copy that. And you mentioned, and I understand, like this is opening up a rabbit hole that can go insanely deep. I can only imagine because you get into a level of refinement and art, real art, when you're talking about, creating, distilling. And I'm curious. So, it sounds like rum was just a personal interest, and then you went down into the almost, I mean, it's got to be some science and some art at the same time combined for real distilling, um, and without giving away any real secrets. But what's some of the differences in Montanya's rum versus other distillers?
It's a good question. I mean, so I was trained in, I always call it, the trial by fire. I started a rum distillery before I really honestly knew how to distill rum. I had some amazing mentors and some people who taught me a lot. And we, as a group of 3, we began as just 3 of us, did a lot of work to really cultivate a lot of intelligence about what it takes to make spirits. There's a lot of resources out there in the world. So I wasn't flying totally blind, but I was definitely, as they say, sort of building my wings after I took off from the perch. But also I would say, yeah, so art and science both really deeply ingrained in the business. For me, I would say that, probably one of the biggest things has been that when I started, rum was widely perceived as being oversweetened. It still is. And that was my experience as well. I would go and buy a bottle of a rum that I loved, but I would always be like, gosh, I just wish that it wasn't sweet. And rum is not sweet. There's nothing about rum off the still that is sweet. That is always added sweet. And so I was really focused on, like, does it have to be this way? Like, why? What's the deal here? Why are people adding so much sugar to rum after it's been distilled? And really, it came down to the fact that people were making some pretty crummy rum, and the rum itself was not of a quality that you would sit down and take a sip of. You'd have to adulterate it in order to make it palatable to the average consumer.
Interesting.
So, again, almost 15 years ago, we weren't having conversations like we are now about how much sugar there is in rum and how many and what companies are not doing it that way. We were one of the first to really promote and talk about not adding sugar to our rum, and no additives in general. And so that has now become the absolute narrative of premium rum. Is like, what are people doing to adulterate it? And that includes adding color, it includes adding sweetness, things that make it approximate an aged spirit when it's not aged. You can do that with glycerin and propylene glycol and all of these chemical additives. But also it came down to origin ingredients. We buy all of our sugarcane from family farmers in Louisiana that we, actually know from here in the Gunnison Valley. It's the coolest thing. They came into our distillery when we were sourcing our sugarcane from Hawaii and said, heck, we're from here in the Gunnison Valley. Like, why are you buying sugarcane from Hawaii? Buy it from us. And that was a long time ago, maybe 12, gosh, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And now we've been sourcing from this company for a really long time. So original ingredients really matter to what makes Montanya different. Beautiful American grown sugarcane that is non-GMO, milled on site and at our facility that we work with in Louisiana. And it comes to us in really raw and unrefined form. So it doesn't have to be stabilized for the, to be in a Caribbean environment for a long time or any of that. I could go on. That's getting pretty geeky for a 30-minute interview. But also the stills we use. So I just, as you mentioned, opened a new expanded distillery here in the Gunnison Valley. It's 10 times more capable of producing rum than our last distilling operation was. It took me 2 years of being a general contractor to bring this distillery expansion online. Through COVID and supply chain challenges, you can just imagine it was not easy. It's still not easy. We've had to actually make some pretty tough moves. We moved our rack house, which is where we store all of our barrels of aging rum, out of county because of some issues that we encountered with the fire protection district. Not issues that I think were, reasonable, but unfortunately unsurmountable. So we now have storage in Delta County. But in general, we've done a lot in this county to really establish our tradition of mountain rum, of high altitude rum, which affects every step of the process, from fermentation to distillation, aging, bottling, the water we use, everything. So it's really American mountain rum and Colorado rum. It's very widely perceived to be very unique in the business.
Love it. You just busted a number of myths that were in my head around rum. And is it true? I mean, the kind of the roots of rum, would it be Caribbean? And has it always been sugarcane as kind of the base? Or
so yes to the second question, no to the first question. So it's always been sugarcane, and it's always you can't make rum from anything else legally in the world. So there are people who've tried to make things from sugar beets and call them rum, and they got in trouble with the federal government entities. The first question is somewhat widely contested, and I have a very strong set of feelings about it, and I have for a long time, and I speak about it publicly. Nobody really, quite honestly, knows where rum began. people believe it began in Barbados, and I understand that that was the beginning of the Caribbean tradition, and it was the beginning of the, kind of what I would describe as the Eastern tradition, or not East, like Far East, but like just the East Coast of the United States and North America and South America and Central America. I believe it began in India, and I can pretty well document that it began in India. Sugarcane was being grown, distilling was happening. This was before copper, before, back when it was in ceramic. It was being distilled from sugarcane. It was rum. Whether they called it rum or not is a different question. But I do believe that that's the origin of the spirit. But the Caribbean is really where people associate. And unfortunately, the reason that that became true was because of the slave trade. Sugarcane is incredibly difficult to harvest by humans. Slaves were perpetually used in the Caribbean to harvest. And that just made it easier to produce. It was also something that they did with the byproducts of the sugar industry. So molasses is one of the throwaway parts of making sugar, and they determined it could be fermented, and you could make a spirit out of it. There was also rum distilling in Boston. So there was a tradition in the United States, and the tradition that I feel more connected to is that long before whiskey, people were bringing rum up into the mountains of Colorado from both the East and the West Coast, and they were using it as a currency. So it would buy you, I mean, on the not so pleasant side, a night with a prostitute, and it would buy you various different things in the economy of a mining town in Colorado, long before whiskey. So I actually believe rum is, endemic in a good way to Colorado before whiskey, bourbon, anything that we now associate as being here.
Yeah, cool. You're gonna have to let me know if this question opens up a conversation that is not going to be contained within our last few minutes here. But is there an insight? So you've mentioned spirit a number of times, and I know that every spirit is slightly different. But when you are referencing spirit, what are you really referencing?
I mean, rationally, logically, what I'm really referencing is any sort of, distilled liquid that's distilled typically to, and I would say, 20 to 30% alcohol or higher. All your wines, all your beers, your ports, things like that are typically below 20% alcohol. So when I say a spirit, I really mean not the beers, not the wines, not the fortified wines, things like that, but really the higher proof alcohols like whiskey, bourbon, rum, gin, vodka. And in some cases, like my favorites are the Italian Amaros and eau de vies in France, and a lot of these beautiful liqueurs that are from around the world, digestifs and aperitivos and things like that. That's my jam, and I love to make cocktails and introduce people to the beauties of some of those European traditions. But when I say spirit, it really, you can't divorce that from the extent to which there's a human factor in every single thing we do, bringing people together to consume. I always hope in moderation, and I do recognize the challenges of alcohol. I've, reckoned with that in my career for more than 15 years. I was a bartender for a long time. I'm very aware that alcohol is not for everyone, but there's really nothing that is for everyone. Living in a snowy mountain climate's not for everyone. Eating bread is not for everyone. Some people are allergic to blueberries, so it's really figuring out like what can you consume safely for yourself, but then coming together with other human beings in celebration, in the spirit of, human interaction and the beauty of what we share as people. I think that's why the word became associated with alcohol was because it kind of produced this community collective response in people that was shared and that took them out of their daily grind and put them into the moment, like really into the moment of where they were and who they were with and what they were doing. And that's what our tasting room here in Crested Butte celebrates, is like bringing people together around delicious things, so that they can be festive.
Love it. Love it. It's awesome. What are you excited about over the next few years?
Oh, it's such a good question. I see a lot of the things that I have been predicting would happen happening, and I'm really excited to see rum take its place on the international stage, the way whiskey and scotch have over the years, where they're celebrated as some of the very best things that you can consume in the alcohol beverage world. Rum has always been that good. It's just been really hard to find the good ones. The good ones are now becoming much more available and on the shelf of your local liquor store. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see where Montanya goes next. As companies in this space grow, we attract venture capital, which is something I've done in 2019. You attract the attention of larger makers. They want to kind of be part of your success, or they want to be part of what you've been up to. And I'll be interested to see how that affects our business going forward, because it's also hard to stay small and survive in this business. It's really cost intensive. Getting your product out is expensive. Getting people excited and having brand recognition is really expensive. Growing is expensive, and I'm on the painful side of a big growth process. So the painful side is when you've spent all the money, you're now trying to rack and bank all the rum that you're making with the new higher level of production that you haven't yet sold and can't sell for at least a year to 4 years, depending on how long you age. So there's a lot coming down the pike for us in terms of hurt and excitement, and being in a rural area, being in a climate change situation which has affected water out in Riverland, which is our main location of our production. There's a lot to reckon with over the next few years, and we'll just hope that we can be vibrant. And we're a leader in sustainability in the alcohol beverage world, and we hope we can continue to be a leader in that world with this new distillery that has some amazing new ways, in which we're using closed loop water systems and biodigestion on site, and a lot of things to really address the fact that the climate is changing around us, and we as a company have to be better. We're a certified B Corp, which means people can bank on the claims we make about environmental and social responsibility, etc. That's a whole other conversation.
Totally is. Second to last question for you. We'll wrap this conversation up, which I've enjoyed a ton. It's been very informative. From your place in Crested Butte, and definitely a small community, it includes the county. From your perspective, how might businesses and community leaders work together even more for the greater good?
How are we working together? Was that the question?
How might we work together even more?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Because those are two very different approaches. I mean, there's
it is, and yeah, to lean in on that question in some context, like I perceive a lot of our community fairly progressive. Like we work pretty well together, and there's always another level. I know, housing is a big kind of on the radar type of problem that is going to take a lot of collaboration. But yeah, just how might we work together even more for the greater good?
I think that's such an important question. One of my roles historically was on the board of directors of, regional economic development, because I believe so much in rural economic development in Colorado. I mean, I've been involved with this for almost 25 years in wearing different hats, many of them volunteer hats. I really this is an area that really concerns me more than ever. There was a time when I really felt a lot of traction around making progress on issues of affordable housing, on pay and pay equity and gender equity and diversity and inclusion, and so many different things that I felt were essential to being good businesses. What I'm seeing right now is that a lot of what I thought was happening is getting unraveled. And it's getting unraveled by a couple factors. One is, say, for example, here in the upper valley of the Gunnison Valley, the extreme cost of construction, the extreme cost of building materials, land, everything. So even if you've set aside land to do an affordable project, which our visionary community and county have, so we have good land. I am sitting in a sustainable house, 1,300 square feet, that I built on workforce, as part of a workforce community for people who live and work in this community year round. It's amazing what has historically been done, but how do you do that when you can't afford to build it? We have a project that's under construction that has not been finished because it went over budget and they had to bring it to a halt, and the contractor left the project. So how do we do that when all these forces are so incredibly against us? So affordable housing being a big one. How do we pay people and give them the benefits that they deserve in a community like this when the cost of healthcare is literally skyrocketing? Of course, I just got my new, health insurance benefits costs for 2023, and I'm experiencing huge increases. As a small business, I want to provide health insurance to my employees, but it's really hard to do. In terms of wages, I really want to pay people on a year-round basis what they ought to be making in any community around the country, so that they can put their kids through college like I had to do, so that they can, take a vacation, have paid time off, all of those things. But wow, it's so hard to piece that together when you're in these incredibly fluctuating economic circumstances. And then the other thing that I really struggle with is that we're so much better at recruiting new companies and talking to new companies and giving them incentives. And we're not always, and I'm not talking about just the Gunnison Valley, I'm talking about the world, but the US, we're often like, oh, but you guys who've been here for 10 years, you guys sink or swim, and we're going to go recruit and give all kinds of tax incentives and benefits and assistance and technical resources to these, up and coming startups. And I'm like, we have to do both. We have to do both. And so I've been working really hard to be present and mentor some of the new startups in the Gunnison Valley, but I've also really recognized that we need to have supportive approaches for the companies that are already here and trying desperately to stay here, when the pressure to just go operate somewhere cheaper, where it's easier for people to find housing, where it's easier to recruit people. Those are big issues that we could spend 5 days talking about, and maybe only come up with one or two solutions.
Yeah, those are big for sure. And when you're talking about the incentivizing for new companies versus investing in established already here companies, it just reminds me of how often business owners will spend money in new marketing strategies or whatever to recruit new customers when they can do much better at retaining their current customer base and serving them. And that's just another reminder there.
Well, and I know
issues.
We probably don't have time to talk about it, but maybe, someday in the future. I know your company's in an expansion mode too. So you and I are here in the Gunnison Valley expanding. Excuse me. And, then we deal with all kinds of the challenges of expansion, which are that we can't keep our arms around the whole company anymore. We need good help. We need high level help. Do we outsource that? Like accounting, bookkeeping, audits, things like that. Do we outsource that outside the county? Do we try to keep it here? Can we find the expertise in the Gunnison Valley that we need to keep that work here? They're just, expansion has its own really challenging elements, and yet it is the best thing for our local economy that you and I are selling things and doing things outside the county, but bringing the revenue from that back here, primary income, that starts a beautiful cycle of people being able to earn wages, spend them in our local restaurants, have vibrant families here, own houses, be here year round. It's a virtuous circle.
Yes, thanks to all that. I know we could talk for hours and hours, Karen, but we're going to wrap this one up. How do people reach out? How do they stay in touch with Montanya and what's going on and connect with you?
So we have a really beautiful website that I am not in charge of. So I'm speaking on behalf of my amazing staff who does that, at montanyarum.com. So Montanya has a Y, Montanya, rum.com. And then unlike a lot of people in business with employees and growing companies, I'm really accessible. You can call our phone number, hit extension 1, and you will come to me. Email is always a great way. Karen at Montanya Rum, or it's better to do Karen at montanyadistillers.com. And then our tasting room in Crested Butte is like a really lovely portal into our company. So we have this well-trained staff who can taste people in the rum and tell them our story and help them to understand how and why we do what we do here in Crested Butte. So that's really fun. And then I'm out on the road all the time. So I get around. We have distribution in 44 states in the US and 7 countries overseas. So if, depending on where people are, they could usually just track my schedule at karenhoskin.com. And find out, where to come see a speech or a presentation or attend a tasting that we're doing or some sort of party or event. So
we'll be sure to drop all those things into our show notes and share those widely and proudly. And Karen, thank you so much for the conversation today. It was very educational and inspiring, and I'm excited to see where you go and where Montanya goes. And I'm just glad that you're here in this valley.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for my beautiful garage door on my house. I love it.
You bet. You're absolutely welcome. Karen, we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.